Born in the shadow of the Golden Throne, billions serve without question, their lives traded for the Emperor's glory. But one servant begins to remember he once had a name. The air was heavy with incense and the faint metallic sting of oil. Beneath the radiant light of the Astronomicon, 1,000 souls knelt in unison, heads bowed to the polished marble floor of the Sanctum Laboris. The chanting never stopped here, not in the first hour of dawn, not in the trembling silence before midnight. Voices rose and fell in mechanical rhythm, reciting the same sacred verses engraved into their minds from birth. To serve is to live. To die in service is to ascend. Among them knelt a single figure whose voice faltered on the final word, a barely perceptible hesitation swallowed by the drone of countless others. His name was Lorien, though none here called him that. He was Servant 9941 Theta, and like all others assigned to the inner sanctums of the Imperial Palace, he was bred, trained, and conditioned for obedience. Yet somewhere, buried deep beneath years of ritual and repetition, a fragment of something forbidden flickered memory. The overseers moved along the aisles like shadows, their augmetic eyes scanning for imperfection. Their electroflails hung at their sides, glistening with sacred oils, ready to punish deviation. Lorien's voice caught again, barely noticeable, but to the ever-watchful Mechanicus priests, deviation was sin. A lash of electric pain ripped across his shoulder. He did not scream. Screaming was weakness. He bowed lower, reciting louder to hide the tremor in his tone. The overseer's vox-augmented voice hissed above him. Faith requires precision. Doubt is corrosion. Corrosion is death. Then silence, only the endless chant continued. Lorien's eyes remained fixed on the marble, but his mind was elsewhere. Somewhere in the labyrinth of forgotten memories, he saw a sun not veiled by the smoke of incense. He saw hands that were not blistered by labor. A voice called him son. He didn't know whose voice it was, perhaps a trick of exhaustion, perhaps heresy blooming within. That night, as the work cycles ended, he returned to the dormitories beneath the sanctum, endless rows of metallic bunks arranged with geometric perfection. The hum of recycled air mingled with whispered prayers of gratitude for another day of service. Lorien lay awake, listening to the murmured recitations. A voice whispered beside him, a faint, trembling whisper, "You hesitated today." Lorien turned slightly. The voice belonged to Dalen, another servant of his rank. The boy's face was gaunt, his eyes bright with fear. "I saw it," Dalen said. "They'll notice if you do it again." "I won't," Lorien replied. But Dalen didn't look convinced. They say hesitation spreads. Like rust, the last one who faltered, they took him to the vaults. The vaults, even the name made the air grow colder. None who were taken there ever returned. Some said it was where the Mechanicus stripped the flesh to feed the throne's machines. Others whispered that it was where broken servants were remade into the mindless servitors that roamed the corridors, their humanity erased by sacred code. Lorien turned away, closing his eyes, though sleep refused him. The rhythm of the chanting below seemed to echo in his skull, a mechanical heartbeat pressing against the walls of his mind. Serve, obey, forget. But he couldn't forget anymore. The next day, as the bells tolled for the morning offering, Lorien was assigned to the Hall of Purification, a cavernous chamber lined with golden statues of saints and martyrs. He worked alongside hundreds, polishing relics, replacing incense, carrying sacred oils. Every gesture had meaning, every movement ritual. And yet, amid that sacred order, he noticed something strange. A smear of dark ash marred the base of a statue depicting Saint Valorous, the defender of faith. He bent down to clean it and saw something written beneath, scrawled in soot, barely visible. "We were not born for this." He froze. The words were blasphemy. Even seeing them felt like a crime against the Emperor himself. He glanced around. No one seemed to notice. Trembling, he wiped the mark clean, but its message carved itself into his mind like a burn. That night Dalen whispered again. "They're taking people, Lorien, whole sections from the lower sanctuaries. They say it's for maintenance, but the beds come back empty." Lorien didn't answer. In the following days, he worked in silence. The words haunted him, "We were not born for this." They echoed in the rhythm of the chants, hid beneath every prayer, whispered through the hum of machinery. One evening, while transporting offerings toward the inner gates, he heard something, a sound not meant for mortal ears. A scream muffled by metal walls. Then another. He froze at the edge of the corridor as a procession of hooded tech acolytes passed by, pushing a trolley covered by a metallic shroud. Beneath it, something moved. The shroud lifted slightly, and he glimpsed a human hand twitching, restrained by iron manacles. He dropped to his knees, pretending to pray, heart hammering. The acolytes passed without a glance. But when they vanished into the vault entrance, he saw it again, that same mark of soot above the sealed gate. A single phrase, "Remember Terra's children." That night he couldn't stay silent. "Dalen," he whispered, his voice shaking, "have you ever wondered what's beyond the vaults?" Dalen's eyes widened in terror. "Don't say that, the wall's here." "I saw something today, a man, alive. They took him in chains. They say the vaults feed the throne, but what if—" "Stop," Dalen hissed. "That's heresy." But Lorien saw it then. The fear in Dalen's eyes wasn't faith. It was survival. Faith had long ago been stripped from them, replaced by obedience. Still, the thought wouldn't die. The next cycle, during the sacred transport procession, Lorien deliberately lingered behind the line. He let the others move ahead until he was alone near the vault passage. The great door loomed before him, covered in scripture and sealant wax, guarded by two silent servitors. He approached, pretending to adjust the offering cart, and felt a faint vibration through the floor, something pulsing beneath. It wasn't machinery, it was a heartbeat. For a long moment he stood frozen. The servitors did not move, their augmetic heads fixed forward. He knelt as if in prayer and whispered under his breath, "Emperor, forgive me." Then he pressed his palm to the cold metal door. A shock ran through him, images fragmented and impossible, faces screaming, chains, fire, a golden light that burned instead of saved, and then through it all a voice, not the Emperor's but something human. "Lorien." He staggered back, his breath shallow. The servitors twitched but did not react. He fled, nearly dropping the sacred vessel he carried. When he reached the dormitory, Dalen grabbed his arm. "What did you do?" I heard someone inside." "You're going to get us both killed." Lorien tried to speak, but the lights above flickered, then dimmed to red. The alarm tone cut through the air like a blade. "Deviation detected," said a mechanical voice. Dalen's face drained of color. "They're coming." The doors slammed shut, locking the dormitory. The other servants dropped to their knees in terror, chanting prayers of absolution. Lorien's thoughts raced, the vault, the heartbeat, the words in soot. He couldn't breathe. Outside, heavy footsteps echoed, the sound of machinery grinding. A booming voice filled the chamber. "Servant 9941 Theta, you are summoned to purification." Lorien looked toward the sealed door. Every instinct screamed to kneel, to accept his fate. But deep inside, the memory of sunlight burned brighter. We were not born for this. As the door opened, white light spilling through the smoke, Lorien took his first forbidden step forward, not in obedience but in defiance. And in that moment, somewhere deep within the vaults, something ancient stirred, something that remembered freedom. The vault doors closed behind Lorien with a hiss that sounded almost alive, a deep metallic exhalation that sent shivers crawling up his spine. The world beyond them was silent, vast, and suffocatingly cold. The light was dim, pulsing faintly from unseen conduits like veins carrying energy through a corpse. Every footstep echoed with impossible clarity. A lone figure awaited him at the end of the corridor. Tall, thin, wrapped in robes of crimson and black. The symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus hung from a chain over his chest, the half-skull of Mars, gleaming in the dim light. Servant 9941 Theta, the figure intoned, voice heavy with vox distortion. You have been chosen for purification. Lorian's throat tightened. Yes, Magos. Speak not unless commanded, the tech priest snapped, servo arms twitching behind his shoulders. The mechanical limbs glowed faintly as they retracted surgical tools, scalpels, clamps, injectors. Each one whispered a metallic hymn of sanctified precision. Deviation was detected in your labor prayers. Your soul must be weighed, your mind recalibrated. He was led through winding corridors deeper into the vaults, past rooms filled with shadows and shapes best left unnamed. He saw rows of motionless figures, human but not stripped of individuality, their bodies fused with machinery, eyes replaced by glowing lenses. They knelt in eternal reverence before terminals of golden circuitry. Servitors. But these were different from those that roamed the upper halls. These ones whispered. Their lips moved in unison, forming half-words in a tongue no longer entirely human. Lorian caught fragments as he passed. Forgive, remember, awaken. The tech priest did not react. He simply gestured, and the mechanical doors ahead unsealed with a thunderous groan. Enter. Inside, the chamber was vast, cathedral-like, lined with vertical coffins of glass and steel. Inside each lay a human form, suspended in fluid, eyes closed, wires buried deep into flesh. Some still twitched faintly, others were motionless, faces serene in mockery of peace. Purification, the Magos said, is the mercy of the Omnissiah. The flesh that doubts must be cleansed. Lorian swallowed. I don't understand. The Magos turned, mechanical eyes glowing like cold stars. Understanding is not required, only acceptance. Servo arms clamped onto Lorian's wrists before he could react. He was dragged toward one of the glass chambers. Panic surged through him, cold and sharp. Wait, I can serve, I can. The Magos raised a hand. You will serve in a better form. A needle pierced his neck, fire burned through his veins. The world blurred, twisting and warping. He saw faces, hundreds, thousands flickering before his eyes. Men, women, children, all chanting, all kneeling. Voices merged into a storm of prayers. And then through the haze he saw something else. A figure radiant, golden, immense. The Emperor himself seated upon the throne. The sight was blinding. But something was wrong. The golden light wasn't holy. It flickered like fire, consuming everything. The Emperor's body was vast but hollow, a shell sustained by endless streams of energy drawn from the billions who served beneath him. The Astronomicon, the beacon that guided all humanity, pulsed with that same energy, devouring it. Lorian screamed, but no sound came. When the haze lifted, he was lying on a cold metal table, sweat pouring down his face. The Magos loomed over him, expression unreadable. Curious, the priest murmured. Your neural signature resisted calibration. Few flesh units endure direct communion with the throne's signal. Lorian blinked. The throne. You glimpsed it, the Magos said, as if speaking of weather. The conduit of divine will. Few servants are permitted such contact. You are irregular. The word lingered in the air, irregular. Not condemned, not destroyed, something else. Irregular units, the Magos continued, are often repurposed for higher functions. The throne's mechanisms hunger for new vessels. Then came a sound, faint but growing, a rhythmic pounding echoing through the chamber walls. It wasn't machinery. It was alive. The Magos froze, head tilting slightly. Unscheduled movement, he muttered, as if speaking to the walls. Servolimbs twitched, tools retracted. Remain still, flesh unit. He moved toward the far side of the room, interfacing with a panel. Sparks flashed, systems dimmed. The pounding grew louder. Lorian could feel it through the floor now, a pulse, slow and steady, like a colossal heart buried beneath the vaults. What is that? Lorian whispered. Silence, hissed the Magos. The core sleeps, it must remain so. But the pounding didn't stop. With a sudden burst of movement, the glass chambers along the walls began to tremble. One cracked, another followed. Then, with a deafening shatter, one burst open, fluid spilling across the floor. The figure inside gasped for air, skin pale, eyes wild with terror. The Magos turned. Containment breach. Before he could finish, the freed subject lunged forward, shrieking. His body was warped, wires embedded into his flesh, hands twisted into metal claws. He wasn't fully human anymore. Lorien watched in horror as the Magos unleashed a burst of energy from a servo tool, burning the creature to ash. The smell of ozone filled the air. Unclean data, the Magos murmured. The corruption spreads. Lorien's restraints loosened during the chaos. He didn't hesitate. With trembling hands, he tore free, falling to the ground. Alarms began to wail, red light flooding the chamber. The Magos turned, shouting something mechanical and furious, but Lorien was already running. He dashed through the corridor, heart pounding, past the rows of whispering servitors. They turned their heads as he passed in perfect unison, and their lips formed a single, chilling phrase. "Remember the first servants." He stumbled into another chamber, breath ragged. It was smaller, a control room of some sort. Hollow screens flickered with data streams, prayers written in binary, images of energy transfer readings, and one vast schematic of the Imperial Palace. At its core, the Astronomicon. Lines of power flowed downward, converging in a hidden section marked Vault Omega Primus. That was where the pulsing came from. The heart beneath the palace. The thing that slept. Footsteps approached, heavy, mechanical. The Magos was coming. Lorien searched the console, fingers trembling. He found a control rune labeled Access Vision Link. Without knowing why, he pressed it. The screens changed. A view of a colossal chamber filled the displays. Miles of machinery, towering pillars of light, and at its center something living. Something that looked human once, now fused with metal flesh stretched over cables thicker than ships. Its chest rose and fell slowly. The heartbeat shook the walls. He saw its face. It was him. Not truly, but almost. A mirror of flesh and pain. Dozens of others surrounded it, men and women twisted together into the great conduit that fed the throne. Their eyes were open, weeping, yet their mouths formed silent prayers. Lorien fell to his knees. The truth struck like a blade. The servants were not just born to die. They were born to sustain. The Imperium's light was powered by their endless suffering. The Magos entered, weapons ready. You were not meant to see this. Lorien turned toward him, shaking. The Emperor, he wouldn't allow this. The priest's tone was flat, cold. The Emperor allows what must be done. Faith is not comfort, it is sacrifice. He raised his weapon, but the heartbeat thundered again, shaking the entire vault. Lights flickered. Machinery screamed. On the screen, the immense figure in the chamber twitched, its head turning slightly, as though it had heard their voices. The Magos froze. No. A voice echoed through the vault, deep and human and broken. Stop the pain. The Magos staggered backward, chanting litanies of machine protection. The conduit must not awaken. The throne will fail. But Lorien wasn't listening anymore. The truth had already ignited inside him. The realization that their entire existence was built on endless torment disguised as faith. The great figure on the screen opened its eyes. They were not divine, they were pleading. Lorien pressed his hand to the console and whispered, "I remember." The vault trembled, machinery sparked. A scream, part human, part machine, filled the corridors. The Magos tried to strike him down, but a surge of energy erupted from the systems, hurling him aside. The heart beneath the palace began to beat faster, louder, shaking the marble above, rattling the foundations of the most sacred place in the Imperium. Lorien stumbled back, blinded by light. The last thing he saw before the shockwave hit was the image on the screen, the chain giant reaching upward, toward freedom. Then darkness. When he awoke, he was lying amidst wreckage. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning oil. The vaults were silent now, no alarms, no voices, no heartbeat. Dalen's face appeared above him, pale and terrified. "Lorien, Emperor, protect us. What did you do?" I freed something," Lorien whispered. Dalen shook his head. "No, you doomed us. They'll purge everyone below the sanctum, they'll." A rumble shook the ground again. The walls split, revealing corridors that hadn't seen light in centuries. Ancient murals lined them, depictions of humanity before the Imperium, before the chains of service. Lorien pushed himself to his feet, gazing into the dark passage beyond. "Then maybe it's time they remember what we were." Dalen hesitated, glancing back at the sealed doorways behind them. "If we run, they'll kill us." "They already did," Lorien said quietly. "We just haven't stopped breathing yet." Together, they stepped into the forgotten corridor. Behind them, the vault doors began to seal again, the faint sound of mechanical voices rising in ritual chants, desperate to contain what had been disturbed. But deep below the palace, beneath the golden halls of devotion, the heartbeat had not stopped. It had only begun to change, slow, steady, defiant. The servants of Terra had always been born to die. Now, one of them had chosen to live. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, a winding artery carved into the bones of Terra itself. Ancient dust drifted in the air, disturbed by footsteps that hadn't echoed here for centuries. Faint symbols lined the walls, older than the Imperium, etched into the stone by hands that trembled with both fear and devotion. Dalen's breathing was ragged. His eyes darted from one shadow to the next as though the walls themselves might strike. "We shouldn't be here, Lorien," he whispered. "This place isn't meant for us." "Nothing up there was meant for us either," Lorien said, his voice low but steady. He ran a hand along the carvings, tracing their shapes. They were high Gothic. They were simple or human. The language of the earliest settlers of Holy Terra before the Emperor's reign. One phrase appeared over and over again. "We remember the light." "What does it mean?" Dalen asked, clutching his robe tighter. "I think," Lorien hesitated, "it's a prayer, but not to the Emperor." The words made Dalen flinch. Even down here, far from the sanctified halls, such thoughts felt poisonous. "Careful," he hissed, "if they hear you." Lorien turned, eyes hard. "Who? The ones who chain us. The ones who say pain is worship." He stepped closer, his voice rising with quiet fury. "We've prayed every day of our lives, Dalen, and all it's bought us is a life we never owned." Dalen looked away. "You sound like the heretics." Maybe the heretics were just the ones who remembered. They continued in silence after that, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the depth of the tunnels. After what felt like hours, the corridor opened into a vast subterranean chamber. It was ancient, older than the imperial palace, older perhaps than the emperor's own ascension. Rusted pillars reached toward the ceiling like the ribs of a titanic corpse. Between them, faint machinery pulsed with light, dim and intermittent, as though clinging to life. And there were voices. And there were voices. At first faint murmurs, then clearer. Lorien and Dalen froze. From the shadows ahead emerged figures draped in tattered robes, their faces pale and scarred by years of labor. But their eyes were alive. Not dull like the servants above, not glassy with indoctrination. One of them stepped forward, an older woman with a data slate embedded into her wrist. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "The upper sanctums don't release their kind." "We escaped," Lorien said, "from the vaults." The woman's gaze sharpened. "The vaults," she exchanged glances with the others. "Then it's true, the heart is stirring." Lorien nodded slowly. "You know about it." A faint smile touched her lips, sad, weary. "Everyone down here does. We are what remains of those who built the conduits long ago, the ones who kept the Emperor alive when the first systems failed." Dalen frowned. You're tech priests. No, she said. We were their shadows, the ones they discarded when the machine cult took control. We call ourselves the children beneath the throne. Her words echoed like a forgotten hymn. Lorien stepped closer. What is that thing beneath the palace, the one in the vaults? The woman's eyes dimmed. It's not a thing, it's the first servant. The first. When the emperor was entombed upon the golden throne, she began, her voice heavy with memory, he was dying. The throne was meant to preserve him, to let his light guide humanity. But its power needed fuel, psychic energy beyond measure. So they made a pact. The first servants, the holiest of his attendants, offered their souls to sustain the throne. They became one with its mechanisms, forever alive, forever suffering. Lorien felt his blood run cold. And it's still alive. The woman nodded. Barely. Its mind fractured long ago, but sometimes it remembers. Sometimes it calls out. I heard it, Lorien said quietly. It spoke to me. The woman studied him for a long moment, as though weighing the truth of his words. Then the cycle is breaking. The cycle, Dalen asked. The throne feeds on us, she said simply. Every servant who dies in faith gives a spark to its light, but faith is weakening. The numbers dwindle. The suffering is no longer enough. The throne's hunger grows and the first servant stirs, if it awakens fully. She trailed off. What happens? The Astronomicon dies, and with it the Imperium. The words struck like a thunderclap. The Astronomicon, the beacon that guided ships across the stars. The light that connected the Imperium's endless worlds. Without it, the galaxy would drown in darkness. Dalen took a step back. Then we have to tell them, the priests, the guards, the Mechanicus. They already know, the woman said bitterly. They've known for millennia. Every century they send new servants, new sacrifices to feed the heart. They call it holy duty. Lorien clenched his fists. Then why hide this place? Why not tell us what we die for? Because truth breeds rebellion, she said softly, and rebellion breaks the machine. For a long time, none of them spoke. The weight of centuries hung in the air. Finally, Lorien asked, can it be stopped? The woman hesitated, then turned toward the far side of the chamber. Follow me. They walked past rows of ancient terminals, past murals depicting the early days of Terra's reconstruction. Humanity kneeling before the Emperor. Humanity offering its flesh and soul to power the new age. But among those murals were others painted over, barely visible beneath layers of grime. They showed a different story. People standing tall, hands raised not in worship but in unity. At the center of the chamber stood a massive machine, rusted, silent, and yet unmistakably powerful. Its design was older than the Mechanicus, its markings unfamiliar. This, the woman said, was the failsafe. The Emperor designed it before he took the throne. If ever his light turned to hunger, this mechanism could sever the conduits, release the first servant from his torment. Dalen stared. You mean kill him? No, she said. Free him, free them all. Lorien stepped closer. Then why haven't you used it? Her expression darkened. Because activating it would also end the throne's light. Billions of worlds would fall into the warp. Humanity would be blind. Lorien looked at the console, dust-covered and cracked. Maybe it's already blind. The woman's gaze lingered on him. You sound like him. Lorien frowned. Who? The voice, the one that stirs beneath the palace. It said a name once, yours. The words froze him where he stood. That's not possible, Dalen whispered. He's just a servant. Names are powerful things, the woman said quietly. Maybe not all servants are born the same. Before Lorien could reply, the ground trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere above, a distant alarm howled like a dying beast. They've found us, she said. The chamber erupted into motion. The children beneath the throne scattered, rushing to defend the entrances. From the tunnels above came the sound of boots, mechanical whirring, the bark of commands through Vox channels. The Mechanicus was descending. The woman grabbed Lorian's arm. "You need to go deeper, find the core. The failsafe is useless without its key, and the key lies where the first servant sleeps." "But I don't even know where that is." She pressed a small data shard into his hand. "This will guide you. Follow the pulse, and whatever you do, don't look into the light." Dalen's voice was panicked. "You can't send him alone." The woman turned, eyes fierce. "If the heart dies, we all die. If it awakens wrong, we all burn. Someone has to reach it." Lorian met Dalen's gaze. "I'll find the truth," he said softly, "no matter what it is." Then he ran. Through tunnels that twisted like veins, through chambers filled with broken machines and whispers of forgotten prayers. Behind him, the battle raged, the clash of faith and defiance echoing through the dark. The deeper he went, the stronger the pulse became. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was inside him, syncing with his heartbeat, calling him forward. He began to see flashes, memories that weren't his. Faces of those who had come before, offering their lives to the golden throne. The same agony, the same hope. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast abyss. A bridge of black stone stretched across, leading to a single door of white gold. Light seeped from its cracks, pulsing like breath. He approached slowly, every instinct screaming that what lay beyond would change everything. He placed his hand on the door. It was warm, alive. And then it spoke. "Lorian." The voice was both his and not his, human and divine, sorrowful beyond comprehension. "I remember you," it said. "I was the first, you were the last." The door opened. Inside was light, endless, blinding, pure. At its center stood the first servant, or what remained of him. A man bound in cables, flesh melted into gold, his body both decayed and eternal. His eyes opened, glowing with something that wasn't hatred or madness but longing. "Do you know me?" he asked. Lorian stepped closer, tears streaming down his face. "You're the one they chained." "I was the one who built the chains," the figure whispered. "We thought we could save him, but the throne, it feeds on us all." The ground trembled again. Distantly, he could hear gunfire, explosions. The war above was reaching the vaults. The first servant's voice grew fainter. "The key is blood bound to memory. Only one who remembers can end the cycle." Lorian stared at the console beside the throne, ancient, glowing faintly. "How?" "Your name," the figure said. "Speak it." He hesitated. The name he'd forgotten. The one they'd taken from him when he was reborn as a servant. It came back now, whispered in the voice of his mother, in the echoes of sunlight he could barely remember. He closed his eyes. "Lorian Voss." The light surged, the figure smiled. "Then remember for all of us." A sound like thunder tore through the abyss. The first servant's bindings began to crack, golden light spilling from every wound. The heartbeat quickened, now joined by others, a chorus of voices rising from the depths, the souls of all who had served and suffered. The chains shattered, and the light consumed everything. The light that followed the breaking of the chains was not like any light born from stars or the machines of man. It was memory given form, raw, searing remembrance, pouring through every conduit that laced the heart of holy Terra. It raced upward through marble and steel, up through the vaults, through cathedrals, through the uncountable layers of the palace that had buried the truth for 10,000 years. For one suspended heartbeat, all of Terra stopped. The endless chanting of the servitors went silent. The incense fires guttered. Even the sacred machinery of the Adeptus Mechanicus shuddered as though it too could feel what was happening deep below. Lorian stood at the center of it, eyes open, bathed in the impossible light of liberation. His hands were outstretched toward the remains of the first servant, whose body, or soul, was now unbound, unraveling into radiant threads that flowed like rivers into the dark. He should have been afraid. Every instinct screamed that he was standing at the heart of something that could unmake worlds, yet he felt only peace. For the first time in his life, he was not kneeling. He saw faces not in flesh but in the light itself. The countless servants who had died beneath the palace, who had given their blood and pain to the golden throne. They rose around him like ghosts made of starlight whispering thanks. Each face was distinct, human, alive. They smiled not in worship but in freedom. And in the center of it all, the first servant turned his face upward, his eyes filled with tears that shimmered like molten gold. "Can you hear it?" he asked, his voice breaking into echoes that filled the entire chamber. Lorien strained his ears. Beyond the hum of energy and the roar of light, he heard it, faint, beautiful, fragile, the sound of a heartbeat, not the mechanical pulse of the conduits but a human heart, the echo of what they once were. But then came another sound. A shattering scream, metal fury, faith twisted into terror. From the upper tunnels the Mechanicus descended. Servoskulls swarmed ahead of them, their lenses flaring red as they recorded the impossible sight. The priests' voices were mechanical, their chants desperate. "Containment breach. The conduits are unsealing. Faith integrity compromised. Machine spirit deviation at 98%. Seal the vault. In the Omnissiah's name, seal it." The crimson-robed magi poured into the abyss, their weapons humming with holy electricity. Behind them came the enforcers of the ecclesiarchy, clad in armor engraved with prayers. Their eyes were wide, their faith cracking at the sight before them. Lorien turned. The first servant's body was fading, dissolving into radiant dust. "Go," the ancient voice whispered. "The world above must see." He hesitated. "What about you?" A faint smile crossed the servant's face. "I was never meant to last forever, but you still have breath. Use it." The light intensified until it burned like the surface of a star. The magi screamed, clutching their augmetic eyes as their lenses cracked. Some fell to their knees, praying for mercy that would not come. Others fired blindly into the radiance, their energy bolts vanishing before they struck. Lorien turned toward the passage, heart hammering. He could feel the corridors collapsing behind him as he ran, walls splitting, conduits bursting. The very palace was groaning under the weight of its own buried truth. Dalen was waiting for him at the threshold, his face streaked with grime and tears. "Lorien, what did you do?" "Something that can't be undone." They fled together through the tunnels, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Behind them, a roar rose from the depths, not of destruction, but of release. It was as if the souls of 1,000,000 servants were exhaling all at once, casting off their chains. As they climbed higher, the tunnels grew brighter. Every surface glowed with faint veins of gold, pulsing with life. The light was no longer confined to the vaults. It was spreading. When they reached the lower sanctums, the change was already visible. The servants were awake, truly awake. The same men and women who had lived their entire lives in blind obedience now stood staring at their hands, their eyes filled with wonder and confusion. The chains of conditioning were breaking apart as the echo of the first servant's freedom touched them. "What's happening?" Dalen asked, voice trembling. "They're remembering," Lorien said. One of the overseers approached, electroflail raised, but before he could strike, the weapon sputtered out, lifeless. The overseer froze, his mechanical eye dimming. The light from the walls touched him, and for an instant his face softened, the man beneath the machine surfacing for the first time in decades. He fell to his knees, sobbing. "Forgive me," he whispered. Lorien moved through them like a storm of purpose, unafraid now. He could feel something within him, the echo of the first servant guiding him forward. The light was his compass, leading him toward the throne itself. Dalen hesitated. "You can't mean to go there." "If this is to end," Lorien said, "it ends where it began." They ascended through the labyrinthine halls, past the dying machinery of the Mechanicus, past shrines cracking under the pressure of shifting stone. Every step upward was harder, not just because of exhaustion, but because of the psychic weight pressing down on them. The throne was awake. When they reached the Sanctum Imperialis, the air was thick with incense and fear. Thousands of priests, soldiers, and nobles filled the chamber, all staring at the impossible glow spilling from the cracks in the marble floor. Some prayed louder, others screamed. A few had already fallen dead, their minds unable to reconcile what their eyes beheld. At the far end, upon the dais of gold and adamantium, loomed the golden throne. Its size defied comprehension, a mountain of cables and circuitry, of sacred seals and ancient bones. The emperor's body sat within, unmoving, a god of silence. But the light that now surged through the throne was not the cold, mechanical glow of the astronomician. It was warm, alive, changing. "Who dares approach the throne?" thundered a voice from the upper balcony, the high ecclesiarch himself, his robes trailing like rivers of blood. "Stand down, none may profane his presence." Lorien stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something beyond comprehension in his gaze. "I was born to serve," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "But you never told us what that meant." "Blasphemy," shouted one of the priests. "He speaks heresy in the emperor's hall." Lorien ignored them. He looked up at the throne, his heart breaking at the sight of the withered form within it. The emperor's face was hidden behind a mask of gold, but beneath it he could feel something stirring, not power, but pain. The first servant's voice echoed in his mind. He still remembers. Lorien took another step forward. "If you can hear me, my lord, then hear this. We gave you everything, our lives, our souls, and in return you gave us duty, but we forgot why we served. We forgot who we were." The throne pulsed. The priests recoiled, their faith trembling like a candle in the wind. The emperor's head moved just slightly, as though acknowledging the voice that dared to speak to him. Dalen fell to his knees. "Lorien, stop, you'll be killed." "Maybe," Lorien whispered, "but at least they'll remember that someone spoke." He reached the base of the throne. The light of the freed servants flowed around him, swirling like a golden storm. He could feel the weight of the emperor's gaze upon him, immense, eternal, unbearable. "I don't want to destroy you," Lorien said softly. "I just want to end the pain." The light gathered at his fingertips, coalescing into a shape. A sigil formed from the same energy that had once bound the first servant. It hovered there, waiting. Above, the high ecclesiarch screamed for the guards to fire. Bolters roared. The air filled with the crack of gunfire, but every bullet dissolved into dust before it reached Lorien. The light shielded him, shimmering like wings. He looked up at the throne one last time. "Forgive us," he whispered, "or forgive yourself." He pressed his hand to the sigil. The sound that followed was beyond sound, a vibration that shattered the walls of faith and machinery alike. The throne blazed with light, engulfing everything. The priests screamed, some in agony, some in joy. The machines of the astronomician faltered, their eternal hum replaced by silence. Across Terra, people felt it: servants, soldiers, nobles, psychers. For a brief, impossible moment, every human soul on the planet shared one thought, one feeling: remembrance. And far beyond Terra, in the endless void between stars, ships faltered as the astronomician's light wavered. Captains looked into the dark and saw something new, not the Emperor's beacon, but the faint, fragile glow of countless smaller lights. Human souls. The throne cracked. Its golden surface split open like an eggshell, revealing not the corpse of a god, but the frail, flickering presence of a man. His eyes opened, ancient and sorrowful. He looked upon Lorien not as a ruler to a subject, but as a father to a lost child. "You remembered," the Emperor said, his voice like wind across eternity. Lorien fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "You should rest." I cannot, the Emperor whispered. Not yet, humanity still needs light, but now, he paused, his gaze softening. It will not come from suffering. The throne dissolved. Its light spread outward, filling the palace, the city, the planet. It rose into the heavens, becoming a storm of golden embers that drifted among the stars. The astronomicon dimmed, but 1,000 smaller lights flared to life in its place, guiding the way through the void. Every servant on Terra felt the weight lift from their souls. The chains were gone. The conditioning dissolved. The prayers turned to whispers of gratitude, not fear. When the light faded, Lorien was gone. Only his robes remained at the base of the throne, glowing faintly with golden dust. And above them, the Emperor's voice lingered, carried through the wind of Terra for all who still listened. Remember who you are. When the light receded, silence fell like snow over the ruins of the palace. For the first time in living memory, the golden throne did not hum. The air, usually thick with the sacred ozone of the astronomicon, felt impossibly still, as though the entire planet were holding its breath. And then the silence broke. It wasn't with thunder or fire, but with something far gentler, the sound of weeping. From the lower levels to the highest spires, those who had been born in service, the cleaners, the penitents, the slaves, the forgotten, all felt something inside them uncoil. Their thoughts were their own again. The blind obedience that had shaped their existence dissolved like ash in wind. Many did not understand it, yet all felt it. They looked at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. They touched the walls, the floors, the sacred machines, all those things that had ruled their every waking hour, and realized they no longer had to bow. High above, the first rays of dawn breached the smoke-choked horizon of Terra. It was a pale, weak light, filtered through centuries of pollution and the endless haze of incense and smog. Yet that morning, it seemed golden. Because for the first time in 10,000 years, the sun rose over holy Terra, unchallenged by the glare of the astronomicon. In the ruins of the Sanctum Imperialis, Dalen awoke amid the settling dust. The once blinding light had dimmed into a faint, warm glow that lingered over the shattered dais. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but he felt lighter. The air no longer crushed him beneath its psychic weight. He looked around. The thousands who had filled the hall were gone. Some had fled, others had fallen, and others yet had simply vanished in the radiance. The priests who once guarded the throne lay in silent heaps, their augmetics dead. And at the heart of the chamber where the throne had stood, there was nothing. No machine, no god, only a patch of scorched marble, and atop it a faintly glowing cloak, Lorien S. Dalen staggered toward it, his heart aching with every step. The cloak was warm to the touch, thrumming faintly as if it still held a heartbeat. He picked it up and pressed it to his chest. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." From behind him came a voice, cracked, fragile, yet unmistakably human. "Did what?" Dalen turned. A figure stood at the edge of the rubble. It took him a moment to recognize her, the first servant's caretaker, a woman whose name no one had ever known. She had been old even before the light came. Now she looked younger, her eyes clear, her spine straight. "He freed them," Dalen said. "He freed all of us." The woman stepped closer, her gaze moving to the empty space where the throne had been. "Do you think freedom is what they wanted?" Dalen hesitated. "Wasn't it?" She sighed, not in sorrow but in quiet awe. "Freedom is never simple. You give it to those who have only known chains, and it breaks them before it heals them." She looked toward the broken ceiling, where the dawn light streamed in like a benediction. "But it was necessary." Her voice softened. "He's gone, isn't he?" Dalen nodded. For a long time they stood in silence. Around them, the air seemed to hum with the faint echoes of song, the last remnants of the countless souls that had been bound to the throne. Then, somewhere deep within the palace, a voice began to chant. It was faint at first, uncertain. Others joined, not in the rigid rhythm of old hymns but in something new, a song of mourning and of gratitude. It spread slowly but surely, until it filled the ruins of the palace. The woman smiled. "They're singing for him." "Who will remember him?" Dalen asked quietly. "The records will never tell this story. They'll call it heresy." "They will," she said. "But heresy is just another word for truth not yet understood." She turned to leave, her steps light against the debris. "He planted something in them, in us. Memory, it will spread. No edict, no inquisition, no priest can stop that." Dalen watched her go. When she vanished into the golden haze of dawn, he was alone once more. He looked again at the cloak. It still pulsed faintly, and he realized that within it something moved, not light but dust, glowing faintly like embers. He felt it stir against his hands. Lorien's voice echoed in his mind, faint but clear. "It isn't over yet." The earth trembled. At first, Dalen thought it was another collapse, but then he felt the vibration rise through his feet, his bones, his very soul. It wasn't destruction, it was awakening. Across Terra, monuments trembled. The cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy cracked, their stained glass windows shattering as light poured through them, pure, unfiltered sunlight, not the synthetic glow of candles and faith-fueled fires. The great Mechanicus forges sparked and went still, their machine spirits silenced. For the first time in millennia, the tech priests did not hear the whisper of the Omnissiah in their implants. Instead, they heard nothing. The quiet of the natural world, the hum of the real. And in that silence some fell to madness, but others wept with joy. Because beneath the noise, beneath the dogma, they heard something older, something purely human. The heartbeat of terror itself. Dalen took a step closer. "Who are you then?" The man smiled faintly. "A memory, a fragment, what remains when purpose outlives the flesh." Lorien, or what had become of him, stepped into the dawn. "The throne is gone, but the Imperium is not. Humanity will rise again, not through obedience but through remembrance." He looked out over the city, his gaze distant. "But they'll need guidance, and the priests, the lords, they won't give it. Someone has to." Dalen's throat tightened. "You mean to stay?" The light around Lorien dimmed slightly, revealing the human beneath. "For a while, long enough to make sure they don't rebuild the chains." He looked at Dalen, and for the first time since the vault, he smiled, a true human smile. "Help me." Dalen hesitated, then nodded. "Always." Together, they stepped out into the light. Below them, the people of Terra were gathering in the streets. The golden haze had faded, leaving behind a sky that was strangely clear. The stars were visible, faint but steady. Dalen looked up at them, then at Lorien. "The Astronomicon is gone. How will they travel? How will the Imperium survive without it?" Lorien's eyes reflected the dawn. "It won't, not as it was." He turned toward the horizon where the sun rose above the jagged mountains. "But maybe that's the point. Empires fall. Humanity endures." The words lingered in the air, carried across the ruined palace as the first true morning of the new age began. And somewhere, deep within the echoing halls of what had once been the sanctum, a faint voice, not divine, but achingly human, whispered one final benediction. "Let them live." The day stretched onward, uncertain and fragile. In the silence left behind by the Astronomicon, the galaxy shifted. Fleets that had once navigated by the Emperor's light drifted in confusion, but some found new ways, guided by strange bursts of golden energy, flickering like the heartbeat of a reborn god. Worlds that had known only tyranny began to question. On distant forge worlds, the cults of the Omnissiah fractured, some clinging to old rites, others embracing the strange new truth that machines were not divine, only tools of men. And through it all, the rumor spread, a whisper that traveled faster than light itself. "The throne is empty." In the decades that followed, Terra became something else, not yet free, but no longer enslaved. The great cathedrals stood hollow, their altars silent. The servants no longer chanted, they spoke to one another. They remembered names, songs, families. Some called it heresy, others called it rebirth. But all agreed on one thing: humanity had changed. And in the heart of that change, two figures worked in the shadows of a fallen empire: the man who had once been Dalen and the being who bore Lorien's light. They were not saviors, not prophets, only servants still, but this time servants of something far greater than the Imperium, servants of memory. The light had not ended, it had only changed hands. The years that followed were unlike anything recorded in the histories of the Imperium, because no one dared to record them truthfully. The scribes who remained after the breaking of the throne wrote carefully, as if afraid that their words might burn. The ecclesiarchy called it the Great Silence. The Mechanicus named it the Null Cycle. But the servants, the ones who had lived and died beneath the palace, whispered a different name. They called it the Dawn that Remembered. It began quietly. No more processions of the faithful clogging the streets. No more deafening hymns rattling through the hive towers. Instead, there were conversations, hesitant, fragile, real. Men and women spoke to one another not as workers of the Imperium but as people. They asked questions, they wept, they laughed. And though the priests tried to rekindle the old flames of devotion, the words no longer found their mark. The people's hearts had turned toward something new, or perhaps something ancient that had been forgotten for too long: the will to live, not just to serve. For Lorien and Dalen, the days blurred into one another. They had taken shelter in what remained of the lower catacombs, not as fugitives, for no one hunted them now, but as caretakers of the quiet. Lorien spent hours walking among the ruins, feeling the air where the throne's presence had once pressed down like a weight. It was strange. The absence of that divine hum made the world seem smaller, but also kinder. He could hear the sounds of Terra now, the distant song of the wind through shattered towers, the laughter of children in the alleys of the hives, the faint toll of bells that no longer rang for worship but for remembrance. Dalen often found him there, staring up at the faint shafts of sunlight that pierced the broken ceiling. "You look like you're waiting for something," Dalen said one morning, setting down a bundle of salvaged food. Lorien smiled faintly. "I'm listening." "To what?" "To the quiet," he said. "For 10,000 years the Imperium prayed to a voice that never answered. Now that the voice is gone, maybe we can finally hear ourselves." Dalen sat beside him. "And what do you hear?" Lorien's gaze wandered to the horizon. "Fear, hope, both in equal measure. They don't know what comes next." "Neither do we." "Exactly," Lorien's tone softened. "That's what makes it beautiful." Weeks turned into months. Terra began to heal, though in ways no historian would ever write about. The factories still burned, the noble houses still schemed, the administratum still drowned in paperwork, but beneath it all something subtle had shifted. People had stopped killing for faith. The Inquisition tried to restore order, to rewrite what had happened as divine will, but even their words faltered. Too many had seen the light firsthand, had felt their chains dissolve. You could erase a record, burn a scripture, silence a voice, but you couldn't erase what lived inside the soul once it remembered freedom. In the months that followed, new movements arose, not cults but communities. The servants' circles, they were called. Groups of ordinary men and women who gathered in the ruins of churches and manufactoria to tell stories, to share food, to sing. They didn't worship the emperor. They remembered him as a man, not a god. And that terrified the powers that remained. The high ecclesiarch declared the circles blasphemous. The Mechanicus called them heretics. Yet when soldiers were sent to break them apart, many of the troops laid down their weapons. Some even joined. because they, too, remembered the light. One night Dalen returned from the outer city, his cloak streaked with dust. "It's spreading," he said breathlessly. "Not just on Terra. The message, it's out there. Ships that escaped before the silence are carrying it to the stars." Lorien looked up from the old machine he was dismantling. "What message?" Dalen smiled. "That the Emperor forgave us, that he set us free." Lorien was quiet for a long moment. "That's not exactly what happened." "I know," Dalen said, "but maybe that's the version they need." Lorien turned the thought over in his mind. Maybe. He stared at the stars through a gap in the roof. They burned faintly, many dimmer now that the Astronomican's light was gone. And yet there were more than before. New lights, small but steady, flickering in places where none had been seen for millennia. "They'll find new ways to navigate," Lorien murmured. "They always do." Dalen nodded. "And when they do, what happens to the Imperium?" Lorien exhaled slowly. "It changes or it dies." Years passed. The ruins of the Golden Throne became a place of pilgrimage, not for worship, but for memory. Pilgrims came not to kneel but to sit in silence, to feel the sunlight that now poured freely into the chamber. The air was warm, alive. The scent of oil and incense had faded, replaced by that of stone and dust and human breath. Children played where once only the dead had labored. Their laughter echoed through the vast halls, soft and sacred in its own way. Dalen often joined them, telling stories of the servants who had lived and died beneath the palace. He never mentioned Lorien by name, but he spoke of a man who had dared to ask why, and of a light that had chosen mercy over power. The children listened wide-eyed, their faces illuminated by the sun. Some called it a fairy tale. Others swore they had seen the man themselves, a figure of gold walking the ruins at dusk, silent, watchful. Dalen never confirmed nor denied it. Because sometimes when the nights were longest he did see something. A shimmer in the air, a faint golden glow, a presence that wasn't quite gone. One such night, decades later, Dalen stood upon the steps of the former sanctum and looked down at the city that sprawled beneath him. The sky was different now, still polluted, still heavy with smoke, but alive. Small pinpricks of light drifted in the air like motes of gold. Behind him, footsteps echoed. "I thought you'd gone," Dalen said without turning. "I did," said the voice, calm, familiar, ageless, "but not far." Lorien stood beside him, the same as he had been that day in the throne room, though his outline flickered faintly like a candle flame. "They still tell your story," Dalen said quietly. "They shouldn't. They need to." Lorien smiled faintly. "No, they need to tell their own." They watched the horizon in silence. The ruins of the city stretched endlessly, but here and there, signs of rebirth glimmered, gardens growing atop shattered towers, lights burning in once-abandoned temples. "It's slow," Dalen said. "Everything worth keeping is," Lorien replied. For a while neither spoke. The wind carried the distant hum of song, the circles singing the old words not as prayers, but as remembrance. "He was the light that burned for all men. Now we are the light that remains." Lorien closed his eyes. "That's enough." Dalen turned to him. "Will you stay?" Lorien shook his head. "No, my part's done. The rest belongs to them." He looked skyward. The faint golden lights, the same that had appeared after the throne's breaking, shimmered brighter, as though answering a call only he could hear. Dalen felt his throat tighten. "What happens when you go?" "The same thing that happens to every servant," Lorien said. "Someone else takes the next step." He reached out, placing a hand on Dalen's shoulder. The touch was warm, real. "Remember this, old friend. Faith built the Imperium, but memory will save humanity." And then he was gone, dissolving into light, a single ember joining the countless others rising into the heavens. Dalen stood alone. He felt no sorrow, only peace. He looked once more toward the city, toward the millions of souls waking to a world without chains, and whispered, "Then we'll remember."